The Considered Life by Stéphane Boublil. Chapter 8. Love. When I am invited to weddings, which is not often, I am always shocked at seeing the misty-eyed, seemingly persuaded that they are witnessing an expression of love. Personally, I blame the Hallmark card company for having overthrown Montaigne's perfectly reasonable assertion that if there is such a thing as a good marriage, it is because it resembles friendship rather than love. So enamored are we indeed with the institution of marriage's presumed romantic ideals that we effortlessly and convincingly prioritize it, often, sadly, over the person we say yes to. That said, giving credit where it is due, romantic ceremonies do make for better parties than so-called, mostly by me, lucid ones, which only involve carpal tunnel syndrome-inducing paper signing and freaking out at the sweaty movers who have just ripped the plastic covers off of your CGC-graded copy of the Marvel Mystery Comics number 92. You know, the one telling the Torch's origin story. Entering into a legal union might very well provide certain tax and insurance privileges, much the way that rowing is easier with a partner. But one no more needs the other than Martin realized he needed Lewis. Seeing this man and that woman tie a knot of some sort, which we are being told is for life, sacred, and yet mostly unavailable at the time of this writing to two men or two women, I think about my and Gina's nearing 2-decade-strong relationship. Why? Who? What? How much longer? Are all questions that stick their daily noses in the barely open door of my silly little mind. As you might have already surmised from the long-winded nature of the way I discuss the simplest of subjects, I am not an easy person to live with. What with the vociferating and all that snorting of cocaine off the tits of barely legal runaways, I do not exactly answer to what romance novelists might call of jocund disposition. Whereas Gina, in stark contrast, farts radiance. But our relationship did not start that way. In fact, it was a long and arduous road to rise to a standard of communal living in which neither of us felt the daily need to change the other, which got me wondering about the very nature of love. We believe, as a society, that love should conquer all, because that is what everyone, from Corinthians to Houston, has tried to convince us of, but it hardly mirrors experience. We drift in and out of love, we think monogamy through, we look at this other person 10 years later, we weigh pros and cons, and know that staying together must involve compromise. Except that word, compromise, is accompanied by baggage, and not so well-stitched baggage. We tend to believe that compromise lessens us, makes us smaller, when really, compromises are made of individual wishes that may or may not infringe on the other's wishes, which, I dare pose, is a choice, not an inevitability. Indeed, we must choose whether our personal needs and belief systems, whatever they might be, are so important to us that if they happen to strip our lovers of some freedom, so be it. Conversely, our lovers must embark on the very same quest and decide, not merely accept, what they are willing to trade in order to live with us. The first synonym for compromise in my trusted thesaurus is agreement, and I like that term much better. As opposed to the former, the latter expresses a willingness by participants to, agree on the premise of the relationship, something I see few people manifesting. Naturally, such agreements can only happen and be worthy if self-knowledge has been cracked open enough for a glimpse into the great mystery of wants, needs, and desires. And that, again, is neither prized nor praised enough by our society to be of utility to most. A handful, though, take the time and figure out what they want, what they need, whom they desire. And they know, for better and worse, as time goes by, which prerequisites the other person fulfills, and which they do not. From that point on, real choices can be made. Ones that pertain to the people in charge, not expectations wide and large of a cultural context to which we owe nothing. Attempting an explanation of love at the onset seems childish at best, and irresponsible at worst, because love is much like God, in that its existence cannot be empirically proven, yet it has become one of our most cherished, if not influential, aspirations. Love is also much like chocolate. brimming with phenylethylamine and anandamide, which can make us feel as euphoric and elated as the naturally occurring gushing forth of adrenaline-like neurochemicals that fuel the attraction between two people. That's right, I looked it up. Knowing that, it would be very easy to dismiss it as a byproduct of merely fallible brain chemistry. However, I would go a tiny step further and call it a form of insanity, especially when the consequences of love are taken into account. Indeed, how we think and behave when we believe ourselves to be in the clutches of portly winged babies with an unexplained fondness for archery makes us either optimistically foolish or inveterate mythomaniacs. In love, we think that we are indebted to another person and we expect that person to be indebted to us. We feel that a bond truly exists in the romantically physical or physically romantic plane. We feel that there are unspoken principles about the true nature of each other. We assume a lot about the other person, who in turn assumes a lot about us. Depending on the relationship stage, our friends see the other person as right or wrong for us. We outsource our well-being based on these now significant others' beliefs and moods, etc. Per the Census Bureau, and when matrimony is attempted as a sealer of said love, more often than not, disaster results in the form of divorce or worse, staying together for the kids. Such behavior is akin to hypnosis, as we seem apparently willingly, downright bewitched by the chosen ones and give power to them on a level unique to this facet of our lives. Most of the time, we find ourselves either abiding by or rebelling against them with equal passionate force because we believe there is something grandiose at stake, something worth fighting for, something we cannot see, cannot smell, do not have the words to explain. What is that? What is so important that some will kill, marry, even compete on TV for? At its most basic, we know that love is merely attraction to another member of our species whose apparent DNA we deem good enough to ally with. But when we stack up the diverse ways that people love, beyond animal instinct, and predicated upon the care for a human being, we end up with a picture of love that is more complex and layered than unadorned impulses first betrayed. Which begs the question, since we understand the consequences of the lovely insanity, why not go the other way and remain unattached, fulfilling mere lustful fantasies that would involve no less heart than last-minute scrambles for anniversary presents? Even though we are born mostly interested in ourselves, we do, after all, live in a society that does not exactly reward isolation. It is very hard to accomplish many things alone, to thrive alone, to even survive alone. When it is willfully attempted and or achieved, one is quick to be branded a loner, an apostate, a Unabomber. Hence, for the express purpose of eradicating the presumed tyranny of the I in team, we are confronted with other people when we're still very young, unafraid, and listening to whatever seed the Disney pop factory has seen fit to grow at the time. Socialization, I believe, is the chosen word to make the activity seem like a positive one. Then, after a while and against many of childhood's better instincts, we find ourselves irremediably attracted to these heretofore detestable other people and make friends. Ugh. Later, and with quite the bit of fanfare, we hit puberty and somehow start to perceive other people as mere people. No longer useless or distasteful, we start to care about them and eventually even become attracted to them. First because of how cool their Native American bracelets are, and then unavoidably, sexually. So begins the long and challenging equipment testing phase during which lips, tongues, genitals, and fluids all become engaged in rigorous experimentation that would make Consumer Reports proud. I remember my first time quite well, for it wasn't so long ago. When I was in high school, I fell in love with a woman 5 years my senior who had me so addicted to her otherness that it took a long time and many tears indeed to see that further and wide-ranging exploration might be necessary before planting a flag, as it were. I know, and you know, that a lot of these early investigations have very little to do with love. even though we believe in them and their perceived power over us when we first enter the deceitful coil of martyrdom, as I have coined it, a stage most people inappropriately call puppy love, which in truth does small dogs a woeful disservice. That is because we start to think about the other person as the one we are going to marry and stay in love with forever. Naturally, we are incessantly being told about bliss of the coupled kind by diamond stores and deodorant companies, so we believe that if this is the beginning, then that must be the goal. Very quickly, we start accepting that the goals offered are real, true, hence supposed to be attained. And so we pick someone picks us, and we think ourselves safe and sound. Of course, it rarely quite turns out that simply. So tangled are we in our obsession with the standardization of feelings and traditions that we even tend to trust the romantic wisdom of Meatloaf more than our own instincts about relationships. That is why breakups are hard, because they remind us most of all about what could have been, not what was. What should have been if we had both been smarter, not what actually happened due to our inability to think while in the presence of one believed not simply to accompany but complete us. Foolish is what we are, and we pay for our foolishness in tears and regrets. Love is an insanity we cannot get cured from, an insanity we crave and which has no known vaccine, because this criminally perpetuated idea that 1 + 1 = 1, even to my own monogamous mind, is a dangerous fallacy. It has become an unfortunately favorite cliché of best man toasts the world over, but the reason for them nevertheless bears out, that the individual must strive to protect his and her identity against the instability and compelling nature of love, leading us down a crowded path that we have come to believe is safe through the symbolic rituals performed at wedding celebrations of any faith, to be the fusion of two beings. It is impossible not to evolve after a lifetime of communal living. That is a fact. But it is also not unfortunate, only perceived to be so because of the unrivaled and predetermined expectations of a romantic life. And when relationships do not sustain, we often decry that love is left. But as a deliberate decision originating in a chemical reaction, love has gone nowhere it was not consciously taken. If you are mindful of your own identity, then you will be able to predict the other person's opinion of you, not merely love them as the hopefully reciprocal recipient of your feelings. This precludes in no way the sentimental gestures you have planned for Valentine's Day, since, as more eloquently said by Pierre Reverdy than I ever could, there is no such thing as love, only demonstrations of love. Making sure that 1 + 1 = 2 is actually the effort that provides a solid foundation for the perceived cheesiness of romance to build upon, since it would then not be professed out of tradition or malevolently commercial tradition, but constructed from willful decision, understanding, and application. Yet, love still too often means either to demand or give away authority to another, a practice maintained for the purpose of safety and the assignment of responsibilities rather than pledged obedience. But that is not love. That is power. And in a cage match, power will consistently win, as it will always be more of a thrill to control than to care. Try it if you don't believe me. Those relationships are doomed not just to fail, but to repeat, after a well-deserved rinse, of course. Soon enough, we plunge right back into the deceitful coil of martyrdom with another person because we expect things will be different. Is that not how a brilliant mustachioed man once defined insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results each time? At some point, the realization must come that love is not for another person, but rather a state. There is something very telling about how the English language uses the word in this particular framework. The insisted upon difference between I love you and I'm in love with you left me quite puzzled when I arrived in America because it is a distinction non-existent in French. I can love my friends, but I cannot be in love with them, as I learned upon my debriefing at Ellis Island. Clearly, we make distinctions in language so that we may hide behind them in life. Understandable, yet a tad cowardly. Still, I love you inadequately describes the state of insanity that makes us see the world sometimes more clearly, sometimes more confusingly. I am often bemused and entertained by the dubious certainty we observers feel for this crude physical matter we consider the real world. But what if love was one of those states that allowed us to perceive reality in a different way? Romantics, we are told, often hear music or see angels when they embrace. Is it possible that the change in brain chemistry influences and alters the mental filters used to discern facts from illusions? And who is to say which version is the truth? When Timothy Leary experimented with psychedelic drugs in order to document their potential in helping people achieve higher level of consciousness, he wasn't kidding. And if drugs are, as the egg in the frying pan seems to illustrate, able to modify the chemistry of the brain to visit heretofore unfouled intellectual lands, then is it so far-fetched that similar deviations might be attained through self-spawned processes, such as love? How will I know if he really loves me? Once asked Whitney to a devoted audience. And it seems that there is no way to know the truth. Truth, especially when it comes to feelings, has always been and will always be a promiscuous temptress who dresses up in the finest clothes Italian tailors have to offer in order to get us to follow her anywhere. But she rarely admits that she is not an only child, but one of countless sisters living in foreign exchange programs all over the world, adapting to each culture, language, and set of morals as they see fit. So who are we to judge the truth about love? For example, monogamy is won most of us over as a sophisticated construct, and it can indeed prove worthy. But, as we all know from literature and tabloid magazines, it conjures as many problems as it is supposed to solve. Why commit to anyone? Carrying along overbearing and unrealistic expectations that run afoul with time, especially when the specter of potential betrayal lurks around the corner. Even though insane, love is not unreasonable, just illogical. And so seems monogamy, mostly counterproductive because we are so ill-equipped to understand our own urges, the very reason why society works so hard to limit them. Sexual urges in particular, as opposed to almost encouraged violent ones, are rarely acknowledged or understood by a society rooted in religion and power, which has continuously shamed our public and collective bodies to the supposed benefit of adhering to a certain form of morality and the detriment of self-knowledge, a regrettable turn of events reflected in our popular entertainment, culture, and codes of conduct. The result is an irrational subconscious suspicion that, somehow, urges must be wrong, that they are the excuses of the weak and lazy, when in fact, urges are but the logical consequence of natural mechanisms. We are born with them, aren't we? I understand and agree with the need for mandated control in a social construct, but not in a moral one. As a modern species, we have not renewed our understanding of the responsibility and freedom to morally control our own urges. We have merely accepted the old definitions we were given without asking any questions, and it is time we did. When we talk about balancing nature and nurture in oneself, we know that the latter is relatively easy to fulfill here on Earth by reading, listening, traveling, watching, and studying. The former, however, is something that is billions of years in the making and begs to provide the spark of the considered life. Experimentation. As much with sex as with figuring out which of macadamia or double chocolate chip cookies one would wish to be buried in. Most often, we do not have a sensible grasp of these urges for ourselves because we do not care where they come from. We are satisfied merely knowing they exist. That was never enough for me. Motivation, like a method actor starring in my own trilogy, is essential to my performance in life. Understanding the why enables the better execution of the what. And it is in this search for motivation that I discovered a benefit to controlling my urges for the greater good. My personal appetites, I realized, are rather process-oriented, in that I relish in the minute details of surreptitious acts. Here's an example, and tell me when this becomes uncomfortable for you. I feel a deep-seated and avowed attachment to my friend Natasha. She's not my wife, yet I love her. And that love is expressed in various avenues available to me. An extraneous eye might call it inappropriate, and probably look at my willingness to give way to these feelings as a path leading to infidelity. I, from the other eye, see it as a way to explore the process of love in a way unconnected to matrimony. The friendship between Natasha and me is not threatening to Gina, my wife, because it is not an event, but a state. Knowing myself, I understand that my goal is not the achievement of a sexual urge, but rather what I can learn from my affections. My propensity to relish in such navel-gazing is something Gina was well aware of when we met, and she understood my emotional commitment to her was not at risk. Notwithstanding gender stereotypes that reduce men to ravenous hunters and women to delicate flowers for the purpose of making Jennifer Aniston movies easier to enjoy, people in daily life apprehend their relationships in many more shades than those two. The problem arises when we allow that flawed binary model to set our expectations and we get lost in a muddle of borrowed rhetoric that serves neither party in the event of a disagreement. I would say that even when a dispute is resolved on the basis of such unreasonable presumptions, the stage is already set for the next disappointment. Undefined is how I would most reasonably consider my attachments, so that no inherited or popular standard can be applied. My feelings for my friend are separated from my urges, not in order to comply with acknowledged morality, but rather so that I may appreciate their rationale. The dependable consequence being clarity, an exceedingly longer-lasting pleasure than that which might be gained from the sanctioned violation of her undoubtedly succulent brown flesh, a possibility that has never entered my mind until now. Well, apart from that time in the steam room. That's for another chapter. Maybe. What I want to be very clear about is the fact that dissociating motivation from the fulfillment of urges is not meant to provide a justification for men or women to explore each other's occupied territories in the name of awareness. What I am suggesting is that deconstruction of the monogamous principle take place before choosing to venture beyond its borders or not. Then you can willfully elect to stay the course, change the course, or drive on two roads at once. But in order to be a real choice, a map is needed, a map of your own making, which comes free by committing to the path of self-knowledge. Again, I am not promoting a truth here, but observing behavior. My path is my own, not yours. I have always been in long-term relationships, never butterflied around. Furthermore, I never was loyal to any type. My first girlfriend, the one to whom I gently handed my virginity and who proceeded to rip it away from me, was a French black girl. My second, an English white girl. The third, an American Jew. And Gina is my very own Cuban American. When I started on my quest for self-knowledge, it bothered me that I didn't have a type. I knew what excited me, I knew what made me curious in a woman or a man, but it bothered me that some of my friends seemed to know what they liked, which they relentlessly pursued. It was a lot more about exploration than it was about characteristics for me. For example, Gina tells me she likes big noses, of which I am a lucky proprietor. And I condone her taste, for love is not ashamed to be superficial in that way. For the first 5 years of a relationship, most of what you believe you love is the superficial part of another, isn't it? 5 years on, come talk to me about who you think the other person is, and I bet the portraits you draw differ vastly before and after. In my experience, after almost 2 decades of common life, it is only in the past 8 to 12 months that I have finally grasped that woman I married for a green card, have started to understand who she is. And I can see she is starting to understand me, thankfully. It is possible, however unlikely, that we are just slow idiots. But I have a feeling that it is quite natural to spend a good while collectively sniffing each other's butts in order to get at any definitive insight into persons unrelated, whether they are or have turned into our type. Accepting to become an other's significant, legally or otherwise, is in effect a promise of sale, to stay around for a while and see what develops. Falling in love is like putting a deposit down for the next 10 years and wait and see if the investment pays off. We must understand it as a long-term adventure and reject that dividends should be retrieved within 6 months to a year, as if another person could ever be known in that amount of time. Let me remind you that I am indeed talking about the promise of love here, not a quick poke in the park, the duration and reasons for which can be anything you like. As in most matters of life, we humans are susceptible to what we hear ourselves exclaim. So when we say, "I'm in love with Anne," we believe that we are, and value the consequential feelings beyond those that emerged after we said, "I love Nickelback." When we say, "Oh my God, he is so amazing," we believe that he is, but really, he's not that amazing. You know it, I know it, and it is a testament to the enduring chimera of love's romantic implications that we continuously feed its placebo effect. We are human, I hear, control freaks by nature. If we lose that control, our minds usually follow, which is why it helps to think of life in much simpler terms, namely as an uninterruptible cycle of food and sex occasionally punctuated by the need for clothes and shelter as our only required preoccupations. Most others, like love, power, religion, money, or time, being mere improvised tools to help in the acquiring of food and sex. Love does not exist, hence it is whatever you want it to be. And the realization that love is an invention, per Mr. Tom Stoppard, does not make love any less joyous an occasion, but actually renders it more powerful, because it can suddenly be considered a state we have a choice over. Love is not something that happens to you, but something you choose to feel. Once you are aware of that, you have control over it instead of it controlling you. A notion not necessarily unromantic, for you can then choose to lose the acquired control and decide to completely wrap yourself in the embrace of the other in the state of love. It is up for your consideration. You looked at that boy and you hung out with him, and maybe you were his friend, and maybe there's just something about him that makes your heart flutter, and you choose to listen to that flutter. There is not one better way to love than another. Gina and I love each other in different ways. That doesn't make us any more or less compatible than people who exclaim, "I love you because your penis is crooked." Oh my God, me too. Wait, what? Sure, people are different, which has been a cause of many a fight that ends with, "I don't know why we're even together!" Yet it must, and thankfully often does, eventually become less about the opinions of one or the other, but about what you allow yourself to feel when that person is in the room. With all this talk of making choices and being conscious and being considered about everything in your life, there is something that, much like art, hints to the part of it we do not understand, that we cannot understand. Of the parts of love we do grasp, many are familiar. Sexual attraction, intellectual parity, generosity, pity, even habit, an easily forgotten influence in matters of love in that we human find unmentionable joy in repetition, which erroneously lures us into believing that we can safely tell the future, since it duplicates the past. But apart from those, there is a part unknown, isn't there? A part undiscovered, which, frankly, we may not yet be able to understand. Still part of our subconscious, perhaps, which we should not seek to make sense of, for it may ruin everything. That part is, I believe, what most try to eagerly define in the early stages of a relationship. That without which love would perhaps feel hollow? But do we really need reasons to love? Do we really need a cause for this effect? Love is letting go. Love is living in the macrocosm. Love is knowing yourself enough to set out on a journey of discovering another person so that microcosms may no longer matter. In the end, when we talk about love, we are really talking about the idea of love, different for every man, woman, child, or mistakenly domesticated lizard. Love is a many wondrous things. Love gives the courage to do what once was only tried. Love is as romantic as the movies say. Love is as cruel as the novels imagine. Love makes us need it. Love doesn't claim to be normal. Love summons the best of us, yet is born from the worst of us. Love paints us into a corner. Love is wildly overestimated. Love makes us into fools. Love doesn't care for temperature. Love takes us back. Love moves. Love makes us tremble. Love is surely unsure. Love denies and love accepts. Love is never sorry. Love doesn't care. Love is not shaped like a heart. Love makes it okay to cry. Love doesn't wait. Love is on the verge of happening. Again, love is the question. Love is not free. Love makes no sense. Love is the beginning. Love doesn't think before it speaks. Love forgets itself at the bar. Love is in love with the idea of itself. Love needs no passport. Love makes no promises. Love keeps hope alive. Love gives meaning. Love makes no difference, and above all, love needs us to exist. That, in a nutshell, is the basis of my relationship with Gina Alvarez. We both fight tooth and nail for the right to be ourselves, every day. And every day is not gleeful, but it feels true to us. For now. You know, until we decide that we've always felt like we've been in a prison cell, the key for which has been on the other's belt, or something to that effect.